Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Kazakhstan American Corners program, 5 weeks TOEFL preparation club with Caroline Ideus, English language fellow from Martin, Tennessee. Today is the 9th of June. That means today is the second practical session of TOEFL preparation test, listening part. My name is Dina, and I'm a coordinator of American Corner Ural. And this event is a joint event of 2 American Corners, American Corner Uskiemen and American Corner Ural. And I'm here with my colleague, Aygeram from Uskiemen.
Good evening, everyone.
Before start, let me remind you that please write your name correctly. And in order to avoid any sounds, please mute your microphones during the speech of our speaker. And if you want to ask questions or make some comments or share your thoughts, please write down in chat box. Raise your hands or ask questions after the presentation during the Q&A session. And now let me give the floor to Caroline Ideus, our speaker. Hi, Caroline.
Hi, Dina. How are you?
Эта конференция записывается.
Okay, the floor is yours. You can continue.
All right, and good evening, everybody. First of all, thank you for giving me your time tonight. I know it's precious time and it's summer, so it's even more difficult to spend this time in front of a computer or your phone. So I appreciate your time. And I'm glad to see some repeats of people that were here last week. So welcome back. And I hope you enjoyed today's session. So let me pull up the PowerPoint. Okay, so just to remind you for new people, my name is Caroline Ideus, and I live in Martin, Tennessee, which is in the northwest corner. It's a small town of 10,000. And I originally grew up in Nebraska in the middle of this country. So I think Nebraska's climate is probably more similar to some places in Kazakhstan than where I am in Tennessee. So last week I talked a little bit about the TOEFL introduction, and today we're going to work on listening. And how this is going to be is we'll do some listening. I'll talk through some techniques. We'll do some practice. And then at the end, around 35, we will work in small groups and breakout rooms. And you can discuss with some new people. And then we will come back and then do question and answer. So the information I'm using is for the IBT TOEFL. I know there's a paper-based test. The listening of the two are quite similar. So just keep that in mind. So the total time is 41 minutes for the listening. So, which seems like a long time. However, when you're doing it, it goes very quickly. So the audio and lecture, so the conversation lecture tracks are 21 minutes. And then you will have 28 questions and 16.5 minutes to answer those questions. And then the instructions are 3.5 minutes. And so I know at first it seems very overwhelming. It's a long time, but I promise you it goes by very quickly. So when you pace yourself with listening, this can be a problem for your test takers, is if you don't pace yourself answering the questions, you can get behind and then it can be very stressful. So they average about 35 seconds per question. when you're doing IBT, but personally, I would aim for 10 to 20 seconds. So that gives you time to maneuver and go to the next question. This is important. You can only listen to each passage once and view each question once, and you cannot go back. It's a little bit different on the paper-based because obviously it's paper. You can do some flipping, but on the IBT, you cannot go back and you cannot skip questions. You must answer them in order. So that is a difference between the paper-based and the IBT. With that being said, if there's a question that you don't know or a listening section, you're like, oh, I don't know much about this, just answer the questions, forget about it, and focus on the next passage of listening. Because I think it can be very stressful if you're listening and you're not thinking about it and you're thinking about the previous listening. It can be, you'll just get a bad score. You're not actually listening. So tips and tricks. So first, know the listening task. And I think this is, and for some of you, you've done IELTS and so on, but there are common questions or styles of questions in the TOEFL. And so the first style is opinion, asking someone. So asking the opinion. So like last week, we had a question like that. What is the opinion of the woman in this conversation? Okay, so problem solving, a lot of problem solving tasks. And there's always questions about student life. So think about the TOEFL test is designed to enter university in the US. And so it's academic focused, but there's student life questions. And then there are questions about lectures. And so know the questions. So for example, they might have a question about attitude. So what is the attitude of the woman? The function. So like, how does she feel? Answer a lot of those inference type questions. Organization. So maybe some kind of timeline type question. Main idea. Inference is very popular. So that's inferring, so guessing the meaning and categorizing. So there are two types. When you do the listening, there will be two types. One is a lecture, and that's the formal structure. And the other is a conversation. So not formal and maybe a little messy. So when you are listening to the conversation on the TOEFL exam, there might be some pauses in the speech. And so be able to understand where those go naturally. It might be a little repetition. So maybe someone repeating themselves or saying it in a different way. There might be interruptions. So where someone interrupts the speaker. There also might be someone talking over someone or talk over someone. So it's a little different than an interruption. So that means when two people are talking, one person's talking and the second person says something at the same time. Then of course there might be misspeaking. So the person might pronounce a word incorrectly or make a mistake, then they correct themselves. So it's important to understand those type of things. So first, we're going to do some note-taking practice. So I hope you all have some pen and paper. We're going to practice taking notes. And I think this is very important while doing TOEFL. And as it says, good notes can be powerful and very useful. But poor notes can be too time consuming. So it's a fine line of if note taking is useful. Because if you are focusing too much on taking notes, you may not have time to answer the questions. But if you take short but concise notes, it can be very useful. So here are some tips. So take notes to remember key words and points. Do not write full sentences. Full sentences will take too much time. Adjust your note-taking style depending on the lecture or conversation. So TOEFL has two types, lecture, conversation. So your style will be very different for a lecture because one person is talking. So that might be the style you're probably most used to, just regular note-taking. But with two people, it's a little bit more challenging. And we'll practice with two people. So I would like us to practice using a flowchart method. This is for two people. I think this is especially important. So a flowchart, I have an example. So for example, should I have another piece of chocolate? Do you love chocolate? Yes. And then this is it flows. Have you eaten a piece of chocolate today? Not yet. Wrong. Try again. Okay. Yes. And then how many pieces did you eat? I can't remember. And yes, you should eat more chocolate. So this one's kind of funny. You should always eat more chocolate, no matter what. Here's more practical example. Okay, and this is taken from a prep book, but so you can see the task, register for graduation. And so on the left, this is a flow chart. Well, these are both flow charts, just different styles. So the left, you have male and female speaker. So the person wrote 2 columns and then made the arrows back and forth. And as you can see, they did not write full sentences and just wrote key words. And you can also see that maybe there were some question marks, maybe they did not understand what they said. That's fine, you know, and then the person just moved on. On the right, this is another style, just different. So instead of making 2 columns, the test taker made male, female, just in lines. So again, it's up to you and your style, your preference. But let's practice. So before we practice, I'm going to tell you, we're going to listen to a conversation. There will be 2 speakers. So let's practice note-taking style. I'm going to practice the left, the 2 columns. I like more visual style, but if you want more of just a regular style, more traditional, you can practice the right one. Okay. So let me restart this. Oh, no, that's the volume. Okay, sorry. All right, are you ready? Okay, let's practice our note taking.
Listen to a conversation between a student and an administrator at the university's finance office.
Hi there. Can I help you?
I really hope you can. I'm worried I'm just really worried I'm going to be in trouble.
Oh, Well, don't panic. Just relax. I'm sure we can deal with whatever's going on. What's the issue?
Well, I've received two separate statements about my tuition payments in the last week, and they seem to. It looks like they kind of contradict each other.
Uh-huh.
I've been a student here for 2 years, and I've never gotten any notice like this before. The language seems a little threatening, and I'm afraid that if I don't figure this out, I'll be kicked out of classes or something.
I can assure you that nobody's going to kick you out of class. We'll sort it out. Now, did you bring the letters with you?
Yep, I have them right here. The first one is similar to the reminder I get every month to make a payment, but
Here, let me see.
it has some extra language out of the norm there at the bottom.
Hmm.
It says something about penalty payments.
All right. And did you miss any payments that you know of?
No, I've never missed one.
That's strange. And what about the second notice you received?
That one says it's the final warning to make a payment, or else my enrollment will be canceled. That doesn't make any sense because it's the first warning I ever got.
Okay, are you sure these are the only two notices you got in the mail from us?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, then it certainly seems like there's been an error, because if the statement were accurate, you would have received additional notices from us. Let me just look up your account in our database and see what the problem is.
Thank you so much. I'm just a little stressed out that something will go wrong with my classes.
Oh, sure. Just a moment while I... Huh, here we go. I think I found the problem. Did you make your last payment during a school holiday?
Sure, I mean, I think I did. I guess I made the payment during spring break. Is that a problem?
Well, you didn't do anything wrong, but it looks like there was an error in our system. The computer is supposed to automatically process payments when the offices are closed, but for some reason, your payment never went all the way through. It's still pending approval.
So why did I get only a final warning notice?
Well, I'm not completely sure, to be honest. We were coming back from a holiday, so there may have been some confusion.
Well then, I mean, what do I have to do to fix this?
Nothing at all. I'm approving the payment now and noting on your account that the error was ours. Just make your next payment on time and you won't have any more problems.
Wonderful. Thanks for taking care of this. That's a huge relief.
Okay, how are your notes? It's okay if they're messy. Mine are very messy. So, and we'll talk about these notes in our breakout rooms. All right, so you can type this in the chat box. Here are some questions. These are not, of course, these are a little bit more open and than the TOEFL questions, but why does the professor, that's not correct. Why does let's go to the second question. What problem does the student have? What problem does the student have? Okay, let me look in the chat box. Good. So lots of types of questions. I'm not being very specific in this vocabulary. Yeah, he got 2 letters of payment of tuition and he was stressed. Very good, everyone. And how does the problem get solved or get fixed? What happens? So how does the problem get fixed? Right. So someone said it was a system error. So the administration person, she said it was administration error and everything is actually fine. So good. Okay, so we won't spend too much time on this, and we'll have another listening in a few minutes with very similar TOEFL questions. But this exercise was to practice note taking. So did you try this? Who tried the flowchart or the more who did the columns or the up and down, the traditional style? Oh, you did columns too. Yeah. Okay. I tried 3 lines. Good. Nurjan. 2 columns. Okay. The mixed version flowchart. Columns with arrows. Good. Good. I'm glad you tried that. And maybe this is new for some of you and maybe it's not, but it's still good to practice. Okay, so our listening practice number 2. This is going to be a lot more similar to the TOEFL, and this is a lecture style. So in this one, I recommend obviously taking notes, and this is a lecture. So you might want to use just the more traditional format rather than the 2 columns, but it is up to you. Before we go, here are the questions. So number 1, what is the main point of the professor's lecture? And this is going to be a little bit more challenging because I have to flip through this for you. I will send you the link if you want to look at the questions there. Number 2, according to the professor's lecture, what does his reputation, again, began to blossom mean? What is the professor's attitude towards Botticelli or Botticelli? The professor describes several features of Botticelli's non-religious works compared to his religious works. For each of the following, indicate whether it is a feature of his non-religious or religious paintings. For each item, check the appropriate box. There are 3 boxes. So I'll give you a second to look at those. And the last 2 questions, there are 6 questions in total. Listen again to part of the lecture. Then answer the question. What does the professor mean when she says Botticelli had the last laugh? And listen again to part of the lecture, then answer the question. Why does the professor say it goes to show you the art world is ruled by trends? So I'll give you a second to read those answers. Okay, so I'm going to also put this link in the chat box. Maybe some of you did not see these questions, and then you can find this link. You can do it yourself. Okay. So all of you have this link. So let's listen. It's about 4 minutes long.
How many of you have heard of Alessandro de Mariano Giovanni Filippi? No? Nobody? Well, let me put it this way. How many of you are familiar with the work of an artist called Sandro Botticelli, or even just Botticelli? Yeah, that's what I thought. It's definitely an easier name to remember. But a lot of you might also be surprised to learn that this artist, who we know so well, really fell out of favor from shortly after the Renaissance until the late 19th century. That's right, it's really only within the past 150 years that Botticelli's work has returned to popularity. And yet within that time, his name, well, his alias, has become synonymous with a kind of grace and beauty that characterizes the best of Renaissance painting. Patronized by the famous Medici family, Botticelli was celebrated during his lifetime for using these qualities of grace and beauty in his artwork. And while his earliest paintings often used religious subject matter, well, we've seen this throughout the course, haven't we, how common this was? These aren't the works that are most celebrated today. In fact, let me ask you, what are the paintings that you most associate with Botticelli? If you're thinking The Birth of Venus, you're definitely not alone. The Birth of Venus is definitely one of Botticelli's better-known works. His masterpiece, Primavera, was painted 3 years earlier. That's another one that you might know. And it was done in the same vein as The Birth of Venus. Primavera means spring in Italian, and here's a slide of the painting up on the board. These are works that didn't rely entirely on the iconography of the Catholic Church. While we do see some holdovers from Botticelli's earlier works, the main subjects of these paintings go back to traditions of gods and goddesses. Note the extensive use of nature as a metaphor, in addition to the nudity of some of the figures, or the skimpy clothes used to cover them. Actually, Botticelli was extremely religious and would end up painting work for churches and cathedrals, using Catholic iconography for the rest of his life. The Madonna and Child, for example, was a popular subject. Because of the popularity of his work, it's kind of strange that he fell out of favor. His paintings were in churches, chapels, and villas all over Italy. But in 1502, almost a decade before he died in 1510, Botticelli was already disappearing from the public eye. Even though he had painted frescoes in the Sistine Chapel, Botticelli's work was commonly overlooked in favor of that of his neighboring artist, Michelangelo. It took almost 3 centuries before an English collector, William Young Otley, bought a Botticelli in Italy and brought it back to England in 1799. Even then, the painting wasn't exhibited in public for almost another 60 years, when its next owner, William Fuller Maitland, lent it to an Art Treasures exhibition in 1856. There, more than 1 million viewers saw it, and art historians began to take note. Some of these historians had already taken an interest in Botticelli's Sistine Chapel frescoes, and his reputation again began to blossom. By the end of the century, Botticelli's works had been extensively admired. The Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood found inspiration in them. The first monograph, or book of paintings, by the artist was published in 1893. Botticelli had the last laugh. In the first 20 years of the 20th century, more books were written about his art than about the art of any other painter, dead or alive. It just goes to show you, the art world is ruled by trends. Just because a particular artist isn't popular at a given moment, it doesn't mean that there's no value in his or her work, or that it won't be popular once more, even if it does take 3 centuries.
Okay. I know she is a little soft-spoken. I hope that you were able to listen, but I did put the link in the chat box if you would also like to check it. You can listen to it as well. And the questions are there too. So sometimes on TOEFL, you might have to listen to the questions. And then, so for example, what is the main point of the professor's lecture? So the questions may not be written, just the answers. Number 2, according to the professor's lecture, what does quote, his reputation again began to blossom, unquote, mean? Number 3, what is the professor's attitude towards Botticelli? Okay, number 4, the professor describes several features of Botticelli's non-religious works compared to his religious works. For each of the following, indicate whether it is a feature of his non-religious or religious paintings. So, and last 2 questions. Number 5, listen again to part of the lecture, then answer the question. What does the professor mean when she says Botticelli had the last laugh? Okay, and number 6, listen again to part of the lecture and then answer the question. Why does the professor say it goes to show you the art world is ruled by trends? Okay, so let's go over the answers. So number 1 is B. Botticelli's career exemplifies certain historical tendencies of the art world. And according to the professor's lecture, what does his reputation again began to blossom mean? That Botticelli became popular again. What is the professor's attitude towards Botticelli? Is C. She believes his career teaches us about larger social structures. So she was saying that he was overlooked, but later he became popular again. So and sorry, looking at number 1. Number 1 is tricky. I think that's a difficult question. My first instinct was C, but B is best, historical tendency. So she gave the timeline of Botticelli. Okay. The 4th, non-religious for all of them. So the professor describes several features of Botticelli's non-religious work compared to his religious work. So use nature as a metaphor. She said she used nature, Botticelli used nature in a lot of his god and goddesses paintings. Includes the birth of Venus, again, the Roman goddess, and then departed from Barda. So Botticelli's earlier work was religious, then later he painted non-religious. And last 2. So what does the professor mean when she says Botticelli had the last laugh? Is he succeeded in the end? So that is a phrase where at the beginning, she said Michelangelo kind of pushed him out and he was not popular, but in the end, he was 300 years later. And then the phrase, it just goes to show you the art world is ruled by trends. And so she means that they explain the larger significance of Botticelli's work and what students can learn from it. So, which means that, you know, this is over hundreds of years. So the importance of those years and of that, the significance 300 years later, 400 years later, that Botticelli has made. So just to remind you, next we're going to go into breakout rooms. And these are what I would like you to discuss in your breakout rooms, these questions. Then we will come back and we will discuss as together.